It is Thursday, the 8th of September 2022, and we're looking at the almost full moon. It's 2 days away from being full, and we're using a Tamron SP 200 to 500mm zoom. This is an old Tamron Adaptol lens from, I believe, the 1980s vintage, and I'm actually very favorably impressed with the lack of color fringing. This is not an ED glass lens to the best of my knowledge. I think they probably did use, some special glass in making it, but it's not full-on extra low dispersion glass. But it was designed to try to get rid of color fringing as much as possible using conventional optical design, and it seems to do a pretty darn good job. I'm actually impressed with the lack of color fringing and actually the overall sharpness at f500. Sorry, not f500. Focal length of 500mm. Right now, I believe we're at f8.5. Let's say half stop between f8 and 11, so probably not f8.5 as I just said. I'm not sure exactly what the half stop is between f8 and 11, but let's say f9 or something like that. The ISO is 64. That's the lowest ISO for this camera before we go into extra low ISO modes. Shutter speed's an 80th of a second, which is plenty if you're shooting video. You don't really need a high shutter speed. And the moon is just a tad underexposed to have some more detail in the Maria and so on. I'm looking at a nice bright white moon in terms of real life. And I'm looking on the screen at a moon that's basically doesn't have any full-on white in it, but it shows clearly. You can see the Maria and so on. So I'm deliberately underexposing a little bit to have more detail in the surface of the moon. So I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing, and then again I'm sort of kicking myself for not using this lens more, because I acquired it a few years ago and I've barely used it at all, if I've actually used it at all. It sort of just sat there in its case, not getting much use at all, partly because it's a big heavy lens. I mean, it's not massively huge, it's not massively heavy, but it's a lot bigger and heavier than my 400mm Nikkor lens. The IFED Nikkor f5.6 lens is considerably more compact, and I had thought probably sharper with less color fringing, but now I'm not so sure. As I said, quite impressed with what I'm seeing here at 500mm. What I should perhaps do is a comparison between this lens set to 400mm and the Nikkor 400mm lens to see just how well it compares. I think it might do surprisingly well. I'm even thinking it's possible it might be better in terms of color fringing. I'm just going to zoom out. This is now at 400 millimeters. So the moon's a bit smaller. And yeah, I think I'm going to have to do a comparison. So I'm going to keep zooming out here. What's nice about this lens is it's a non-changing aperture as you zoom out. I believe the focus also holds. So now we're at 300. Now we're at 250. And now we're at 200 millimeters. So the moon's quite small. We will be zooming back in shortly, but I just wanted to go through the full range. So that's 200 millimeters, and we're just going to zoom out to 250, 300, 350, 400, and back to 500, the longest focal length on this zoom. And yes, I'm pretty impressed actually with what I'm seeing, and I am sort of regretting not having given this lens more use in the past. I certainly will be using it more in the future. So that's it. We just put the moon off to the left there. We'll raise things a bit so it can move up through the frame. And yeah, so we'll just tighten up the tripod here. And I think I'm going to go and crack open a Boreal Doré and have a beer, and we'll just let the moon rise up through the frame here. So again, ISO 64, lowest ISO for this camera, best dynamic range and so on, lowest noise and so on. Oh, did I forget to mention the camera's a Nikon D810 DSLR? I think I did. I didn't mention that. So f8, and I think it's actually, because it says f8 on the screen here, but I think I'm actually at like a half stop between f8 and 11. I don't think this is actually open fully to f8. The maximum opening is 5.6. And I don't particularly want to be at maximum opening in terms of best optical quality, although there may not be a big difference in terms of sharpness, in terms of center sharpness. In fact, some lenses are just as sharp in the center, wide open, as they are when they're stopped down a bit. It's the edge sharpness that tends to improve as you stop down. And we don't really need to be too concerned about edge sharpness in this context. But nevertheless, f8.5, 80th of a second, so reasonably high shutter speed. But we don't have to worry too much about shutter speed when we're on a tripod and basically not doing much in terms of touching the lens. There might be a bit of vibration because I'm on my porch, I'm not on the ground, so there could be some vibration, especially as I walk away to get that beer. And yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're just going to let this run a bit.
Well, I guess I let it run a bit too long, didn't I? That's that for now.
Oh, almost 20 minutes. Yeah, just running out of time here. Hope you enjoyed this boring video.